Hi everybody, I think maybe we'll get started. Feel free to, as I say, go back and grab yourself a cup of coffee or some water or some cake. And thank you for coming out. It's early in the semester, we're not exhausted yet, yay. But it's really nice to start off the semester with a reading by C.K. Williams. Poet I've been reading for 25 years with great pleasure the entire time. An amazing poet, extraordinary poet. I could tell you everything that was in the email. It won all the major prizes, the Guggenheim, the National Book Critics Circle Award, the National Book Award, and the Pulitzer Prize, the Ruth Lilly Prize, and all that. But that's less important than the fact that he actually deserves them. He's a really, he's a terrific poet. He's extraordinarily human, and I know that's sort of a platitude, but there is a kind of a political, sociological, and psychological depth to poetry that's really quite rare. He doesn't write to exercise his words. He writes to exercise his soul in ways that are moral and important, narrative and lyrical, and they sound great too. And having said that little bit, I'm just going to step out of the way and let C.K. Williams take it over.
I thought I'd start with a sex poem. Whoa, since I know that college people need encouragement. Go back. First I did my thing, that's to say her thing to her, for her. Then she did her thing, I mean my thing, to me, for me. Then we did our thing together, then again, the other way though. Then once more, that way again, then we were done and we were at dinner, though I desperately missed the other things now and said so. Don't you know I can't enjoy anything else now? And still love tipsy, love stunned, ever. I said I'll never enjoy anything else ever again. Except I also meant this. I mean this being together, thinking of that, or not even her thinking, who knows what she's thinking. I mean me thinking of that, of her thinking and thinking. But now that I've told her, told you, are we then back to, again, that? Yes, and thank goodness I'm back there. We're back there. I missed you out here by myself, even thinking of that, which is why I had to do all this thinking to take us even in such a partial way back. Okay, should I read another sex poem? Yeah, I'll read another one. Okay, this one requires some explanation a little bit, association. There's a reference in it to Cornell box. Joseph Cornell was a great American artist who some of you might not yet have heard of, but you will. Whose work consisted of little boxes in which he would put all sorts of little objects. Glass angels, things you found in the street, marbles, little maps, little drawings, and they become little universes in themselves. And I'm using that. I'm going to speak in the poem of my Cornell box of pastness. So you're supposed to get an image of this little box. And then near the end of the poem, I'm going to say, they flee, oh they flee. That's referring to Thomas Wyatt's, they flee from me that once sometime did me seek. And then the end of the poem says, my lute be still. And that's another line from Thomas Wyatt, who was the great Renaissance English poet who kind of read Shelley. The poem is called Salt. Abashingly eerie that just because I'm here on the long, low tide beach of age with briny time licking insidious eddies over my toes, there to rise in me those mad weeks a lifetime ago when I had two lovers. One who soaked herself so in Chanel that before I went to the others, I'd scrub the other. I'd scrub with fistfuls of salt, and not only would the stink be vanquished, but I'd feel shame-shriven, pure, which thinking about is a joke. How not acknowledge obsolete notion or know that I was a cad. Luckily, though, I've hung on to my Cornell box of pastness with its 10,000 compartments. So there's a place for these miniature mountains of salt, each with its code tag of amnesia, and also for the flock of Donnas and Ednas and Annies, a resplendent feather from each. And though they're from the times I was not only crass, stupid, and selfish, but thoughtless, art word for shitty, their beaks open now, not to berate, but stereophonically warble forgiveness. Such an engrossing contrivance, up near a corner in tinsel, my memory moon still glowing, still cruel, because of the misery it magnified, the times I was abandoned. They flee, oh they flee. I'd abrade myself not with salt, but anapest, iams, and jammets, and here they still are, burned in ink, but here too, dead center, Catherine. Catherine is my wife. This is the woman in the other poem, back. She's back. Dead center Catherine with her hand-carved frame in a frame, like the hero in westerns who arrives just in time to rescue the town. She galloped up to save me. Well, I suppose soon the lid with its unpickable latch will come down, but the top, I hope, will be glass, see-through like Cornell's. So I'll watch myself for a while boinging around like a pinball, still loving this flipper thing life that so surprisingly cannoned me up from oblivion's ramp, and to which I learned to sing in my own voice, but sometimes thanks be in the voice of others, which is why I can croon now, my lute be still, and why I can cry, for I have done. That last is from Thomas White, too. So then I'll read another sort of frustrated sex poem. It's called Bianca Burning. It tells a story, and it's true. And there's a reference, several references, and this is my new book, which is coming out in a few weeks. So it's sort of nice for me to read these. There's some references in it to Bruno Schulz. Bruno Schulz was a great Polish prose writer, who may have been one of the great prose writers of the 20th century. And there's a reference to a character he has who's named Bianca. And the story that the poem tells is about a girl, woman, I am involved with, whose name is Bianca. I think that's all you have to know. Okay? It's called Bianca Burning. And this is a poem that starts out talking about sexual terror. Has anybody here ever experienced sexual terror? You don't know what you're missing. Bianca Burning. The sexual terror lions are roaring into my ears as I make my way between their cages at the Bertram Mills Circus in England in 1957 when I'm 20. The terrible lions have roared for 6 months, and though I don't know it, they'll roar for 6 more, then be extinguished, leaving only their irksome echo the rest of my life. A circus. I'm traveling with a circus, an exotic thing to think. And I have a Bianca. Not the Bianca Bruno Schulz had in his Spring, an enchanting Bianca whom one, quote, would notice how with every step, light as a dancer, she enters her being, unquote. A Bianca, rather, who's lush, ardent, and though only 18, more amorously advanced than I am, with breasts too beautiful to remember, and that other thing further down she'll bring with her every day to my digs, to roll with me on my bed while I flail and despair, and return with her back through that savage alley, that gauntlet of error and terror, to the caravan where her father and mother lived, and where we ate dinner together. A caravan in England is what we call a Bianca's father is a clown, not the way I was a clown, a sexual clown, not the way Schultz depicts himself in his drawings as almost a clown with his rack of compulsions. Bianca's father's a real clown, famous, with different names in different countries, who in the ring in his chaplain-esque costume is hilarious, reckless, contagiously joyful. Yet Bianca's father, like me, is possessed by a terror, though no one dares frame it that way. Bianca's mother, you see, has claustrophobia, a terrible case, and it was agreed that for her to sleep in their cramped trailer would be painful, insupportable really. So Bianca's beautiful mother, lusher even than Bianca, and so young seen from here, younger than my daughter now, would kiss her impassive pipe-smoking husband and leave in the car that came every night to take her to the circus owner's yacht. And we remnants, we relics, would gloomily sit. Bianca, because soon she'd have to go back to her job as a nightclub dancer, and the husband for obvious reasons, and me, part of the act now, with my rituals of desire and my dread of the lions I'll pass again as I wend the tortuous route to my room to wait for Bianca's next visit tomorrow with her breasts and that other thing which I could hardly bring myself in those days to call by its name, so fearsome it was, as it was for the tragic and timid Schultz, who even in his erotic etchings of perfectly formed nudes with Schultz-like men abjectly groveling, crushed, dejected under their elegant feet, depicts no vaginas, or none not submerged in inkiest shadow, save one, and that sketchy, inconsequential, which surely proves that Schultz knew the firmament of vagina is fathomless, without measurable dimensions, altering such shape as it does have with impatience, for which Schultz's Bianca, who, quote, controlled her glamour with pity, unquote, and whose wisdom was, quote, full of sadness, unquote, must by now offer demure consolation, while mine, my Bianca, struts with top hat and whip across the arena to take her bow. Did you follow that okay? In the age of internet, I went online and I looked up Bianca. I've never told anyone this. Her name was Bianca Cavallini. It still is, and I found her. You don't mind if I digress for a moment? I found her on an Italian movie that took place not long after this, of a certain song being sung by different singers in Italy, Italian, and one sang and then another. And then the third was a group of men singing, and Bianca was standing in front of them in a low-cut blouse, and she was just standing there. She wasn't even bothering to sing. And there she was, my Bianca. And then they took it off. You can't get it on YouTube all of a sudden. I went back to see how she was. Because of copyright reasons, this has been taken off the air. Isn't that terrible? She doesn't even know I found her. Maybe I'll read one last sort of sexy poem, but a sad one. It's called Wood. That girl I didn't love, then because she was going to leave me, love. That girl, that Sunday when I stopped by and she was in bed in her nightgown. It only came to me later that someone else had just, good God, been with her. That girl, when my hand touched her belly under her plush mesh nightgown, began turning her belly to wood. I hadn't known this could be done, that girls, that humans could do this. Then when her belly, all her belly was wood, she began turning the rest of herself to perhaps something harder, steel or harder, Perhaps she was turning herself, her entire once so soft self, to some unknown mineral substance found only on other very far planets. Planets with chemical storms and vast cold ammonia oceans of ice. And I just had to pretend I wasn't taking this lightly. I wasn't a kid anymore. That I wasn't one of those pitted potato-shaped moons with precarious orbits. And then I was out in the street. It was still Sunday, though I don't recall bells. And she, where did she go, dear fragment, dear figment, dear fragment? Where are you now, in your nightgown, in your bed, steel and wood, dear steel, dear wood? I never could find her on the internet. I walked through town today, through the uptown, you call it. There's a used bookstore, and in the window, there's a poster that says, Save the United States, and it's a picture of the ship, the old ocean liner, the United States, which interestingly enough is the boat I took to go to Europe where I met Bianca. But the boat has been sitting at a dock in Philadelphia, decaying for many, many years, and this poster was raising money to try to save it. Well, my kids live in Philadelphia, and I go there pretty often, and the boat is docked across from IKEA. How do you say it in America? IKEA? IKEA. In French you say IKEA. And I wanted to write a poem about it because it seemed to embody so much of what's been going on in America since then. So it's a hard way to figure out how to write the United States. The rusting, decomposing hulk of the United States is moored across Columbus Boulevard from IKEA, rearing weirdly over the old municipal pier on the mostly derelict docks in Philadelphia. I'd forgotten how immense it is. I can't imagine which of the hundreds of portholes looked in on the four-man cabin 5 flights down I shared that first time I ran away to France. We were told we were the fastest thing afloat, and we surely were, even from the tiny deck where passengers from tourists were allowed. Our weight boiled ever vaster out behind. That such a monster could be lifted by mere waves, and in the storm that hit us halfway across, tossed left and right until we vomited, seemed a violation of some natural law. At Le Havre, we were out of scale with everything, when a swarm of tiny tugs nudged like piglets at the teat, the towering mass of us in place. All the continent of Europe looked small. Now, behind its raveling chain-link fence, the ship's a somnolent carcass, cables lashed like Lilliputian leashes to its brow, its once pure paint discoloring to blood. Upstream, the shells of long-abandoned factories crouch for miles beneath the interstate. The other way, the bridge named after Whitman hums with traffic towards the suburbs, past his grave. And America's mighty flagship waits here, to be auctioned, I suppose, stripped of anything it might still have of worth, and towed away and torched to pieces on a beach in Bangladesh. Did that make you sad? Makes me sad. Here's a political poem, Roe versus Wade, another sort of sex poem. I wonder if any male but me is still living who remembers that pre-Roe Wade abortionist doctor who demanded, along with his payment, a kiss, a soul kiss, as it was called then. And isn't that what it felt like, those astounding first times her tongue slid warm and wet and alive onto yours? That something you might call your soul had been revealed? It was another thing with that back street lech for a woman, a girl, the one who told me had been barely 18. She shuddered just to remember in rage or terror. I was glad not to have had to have been there. This was years after. We were in bed. We'd make love. So lithe she was. With such ardor, she worked me in deeper. I only found out later from friends that after that one, she'd had another adventure in a hotel in New York. Someone with a coat hanger she'd been told was a midwife. Hemorrhage, infection, and she was left sterile. As many times as we were together, she never told me, nor told me either that she was on dope all day, every day. Why she'd trust me with the one story, but not the other, with her body, but not with what she was doing to it. Just more of the miserable mysteries of that time. That's a true story, too. Childhood. A gaff. Does everybody know what a gaff is? That's my wife. She's French, so that she wouldn't just think it's a gaff is like a terrible error, an error of manners, mistake. It's sort of clumsy, something. The gaff. If that's someone who's me, yet not me, yet who judges me, is always with me, as he is, shouldn't he have been there when I said so long ago that thing I said? If he who rakes me with such not trivial shame for minor sins now were there then, shouldn't he have warned me he'd even now devastate me for my unpardonable affront? I'm a child then, yet already I've composed this conscience beast who harries me. Is there anything else I can say with certainty about who I was, except that that he, could already draw from infinitesimal transgressions complex chords of remorse and orchestrate ever undiminishing retribution from the hapless rest of myself? The son of some friends of my parents has died, and my parents, paying their call, take me along, and I'm sent out with the dead boy's brother and some others to play. We're joking around, and words come to my mind, which to my amazement are said. How do you know when you can laugh when somebody dies, your brother dies, is what's said, and the others go quiet, the backyard goes quiet, everyone stares, and I want to know now why that someone in me who's me yet not me, let me say it. Shouldn't he have told me the contrition cycle would from then ever be upon me? It didn't matter that I'd really only wanted to know how grief ends and when. I could hear the boy's mother sobbing inside, then stopping, sobbing, then stopping. Was their end of her grief already there? Had her someone in her told her it would end? Was there someone in her kinder to her, not tearing at her as mine did, still does me, for guessing grief someday ends? Is that why her sobbing stopped sometimes? She didn't laugh though, or I never heard her. How do you know when you can laugh? Why couldn't someone have been there in me, not just to accuse me, but to explain? The kids were playing again. I was playing. I didn't hear anything more from inside, the way sometimes What's in me is silent too, and sometimes, though never really, forgets. This is a poem called Apes. It has some quotes in it, which I'll put in quotes. It has one line that won't be very clear when I read it quickly. It says, unlike the Pacific gorillas in the forest of Windy. My wife and I went to Africa to see gorillas, and they were in a forest called Windy. We named our dog Windy. And the Pacific gorillas means that they were peaceful, very peaceful with each other. And then there's one other reference I should explain, the analects. There's a reference to the analects. And those are the analects of Confucius, which were the grounding for society, for Chinese culture and society for many thousands of years. And there still should be. Apes. One branch I read of a species of chimpanzees has something like territorial wars. And when the army, I suppose you'd call it, one tribe prevails and captures an enemy, quote, several males hold a hand or foot of the rival so the victim can be damaged at will, unquote. This is so disquieting. If beings with whom we share so many genes can be this cruel, what hope for us? Still, rival, victim, will. Don't such anthropomorphic terms make those simian social political conflicts sound more brutal than they are? The chimps that Catherine and I saw on their island sanctuary in Uganda, we loathed. Unlike the Pacific gorillas in the forest of Windy, they fought, dementedly shrieked, the dominant male lorded it over the rest. They were, in all, too much like us. Another island from my recent reading, where Columbus, on his last voyage, encountering some, quote, Indians, unquote, who greeted him with curiosity and warmth, wrote, before he chained and enslaved them, they don't even know how to kill each other. It's occurred to me, I've read enough. At my age, all I'm doing is confirming my sadness. Surely the papers, war, terror, torture, corruption, it's like broken glass in the mind. Back then, I knew nothing. Back when I knew nothing, I read all the time, poems, novels, philosophy, myth, but I hardly glanced at the news. There was a distance between what could happen and that part of myself I felt with. Now everything's so tight against me, I hardly can move. The Analects say people in the Golden Age weren't aware they were governed. They just lived. Could I have passed through my own Golden Age and not even known I was there? Some goal, nuclear rockets aimed at your head, racism, sexism, contempt for the poor. And there I was, reading. What did I learn? Everything, nothing, too little, too much. Just enough to get me to here, a long-faced, white-haired ape with a book, still turning the page. The first one is sort of, it's a poem for the other poets and writers in the room. I don't know how many you are. I have a friend who's a film director in France, and he told me that you can always tell actors who are good actors because they're crazy. You look at them and you know they're really crazy. He says those are the ones he wants in his movies. And so I was thinking, if I look out into the audience and find some crazy people, would they be the poets?
Go for it. Do it. Go for it.
Anyway, there's some references in here that some of you might not know yet. There's a reference to Yeats. These are great poets, Yeats, Auden, George Herbert, or Larkin. There's Elizabeth Bishop. I just say Bishop. And then Lowell, Keats, Rilke, Wordsworth, or Wyatt, those are all more poets. So you'll get it. Go whacked. Every morning of my life I sit at my desk getting whacked by some great poet or other. Some Yeats, some Auden, some Herbert or Larkin, and lately a whole tribe of others, younger than me. Whack, wiped out every day. I mean since becoming a poet. I mean wanting to. One never is really a poet, or I'm not. Not when I'm trying to write, though then comes a line, maybe another, but still pops up again, Yeats say, and again, whacked. Wait, old brain in my head, I'd forgotten that whacked in crime movies means murdered, rubbed out by the mob. Little the mob guys would think that poets could do it, and who'd believe that instead of running away, you'd find yourself fleeing towards them. Some sweet-seeming bishop who's saying so, but whack, you're stampeding again through her poems like a mustang. Whack so hard that you bash the already broken crown of your head on the roof of your stall. What a relief to read for a while some bad poems. Still, I try not to. Bad, whackless poems can hurt you, can say you're all right when you're not, can condone your poet coward who compulsively asked if you're all right. Am I all right? Not wasting your time. Am I wasting time? Though you know you are wasting time if you're not being whacked. Bad poems let you off that. The confessional mode now. I've read reams. I've written as many. Meanwhile, this morning, this very moment, I'm thinking of George Herbert composing. I see him by himself in some candlelit chamber, unbearably lonely to us, but glorious to him. And he's hunched over, scribbling, and the room's filling with poems whacking at me. And Herbert's not even paying attention as the huge tide of them rises and engulfs me in warm tangles of musical down, as from the breasts of the choiring dawn tangling larks. Quote, lovely enchanting language, sugar cane, unquote, whack. Quote, the sweet strains, the lullings, unquote. Oh, whack, Lowell or Keats, Rilke or Wordsworth or Wyatt, whack. 50 years of it, old racehorse, plug hauling its junk. Isn't it time to be put out to pasture? But I'd still, if I could, lie down like a mare giving birth, arm in my own uterine channel to tug out another, one more, only one more, poor damp little poem, then I'll be happy, I promise, I swear. Okay, poem. Another little sex. There's so many pretty girls here. Well, haste. Not so fast, people were always telling me. Slow down, take your time. Teachers, coaches, the guy who taught me to ride. Stop cowboying, he'd shout, as if that wasn't the point. But the admonition that stuck was the whisper, that girl, that woman, that smudged now, dear girl, woman, legs so tightly wound round me side, young as she was, to my ear. Ah, the celestial contraption we made, though. No matter how you swerved it, it held together. Why not go faster? But she, with her fluttery guttural slower, go slower, knew better. Knew better. No one says not so fast now, not Katrine when I hold her, not our dog as I putter behind her, yet everything, past, present, future, rushes so quickly through me, I frayed like a flag. Unbuckle your spurs, life. Don't you know up ahead where the road ends, there's an abyss, no room for galloping anymore here. Surely by now you should know better, know better. This is called Exhaust, if I can find it. This is, as I say, a new book, so I don't know where everything is in it. This is a good way to waste some time. Exhaust. Again, there's a lot of references in here. My new book, I decided, at some point I had decided early on that I wanted my poems to be accessible to everyone. So I never said anything that wasn't accessible. And in my last book, in this book, I decided most of the people who read my damn poems are poets anyway. So I might as well use the actual associations that I have in my mind, which are to poetry and authors and stuff like that. So in here, there's a reference to Lowell's father's spanking new one. That's Robert Lowell, who wrote a series of poems about his father's death. And one of them is a sad poem about his father's car being his only friend. Then there's a reference to Albert Camus, who died in a car accident. And he wrote a book called Sisyphus. That's what's the whole title?
The myth of Sisyphus.
What?
The myth of Sisyphus.
The myth of Sisyphus, thank you. Which basically is a philosophical tract saying that although suicide seems the most logical thing to do, it's probably not the best thing. Then there's a reference to Anne Sexton's father. Anne Sexton was a wonderful poet who died in 1975, who committed suicide by running her exhaust into her garage. And I guess that's all the associations. Well, Pollock is the great painter. Pollock. Sebald is a great German writer. Nathaniel, to get it. Exhaust. My grandson wants a Ferrari. I buy one for him. Why not? The second a Mercedes. The third a Porsche. Why not? How things change. My grandfather wanted only the pickup. One icy Rochester night, the year before I was born, he skidded through a gate and plowed head-on into a train. My grandson's cars cost $1, part of a vast collection of racers, convertibles, trucks, even antiques from the time I had my first car, a 5-year-old ungainly green Chevy, not like Lowell's father's spanking new one, quote, with gold-gilded hoofs, unquote, wrote Lowell, and slashingly, his best friend. I treasured my Chevy too, though it plodded compared to a friend's Olds. That's Oldsmobile. It doesn't exist anymore. Some of you might have never heard of it. I treasured my Chevy too, though it plodded compared with a friend's Olds that sped us one New Year's Eve after the parties down the Parkway at 110. My grandfather, I gather, was vain of his truck and his driving, but my grandmother would grumble. He was a terrible driver. We were good drivers, we were certain. Better than good. Didn't we all but live in our cars? Wasn't the best part even of a date when you made out with your girlfriend and back? Right now, hitting 100, don't we love each other for how our tires are glued to the pavement and life has no end? I hadn't seen Warhol's print yet of mangled teenagers spilled from their wreck. I didn't see much then beyond cars, like my grandsons, who knew every make, model, top speed, and 0 to 60 by heart, and who'll squabble because one has stolen another's X something or other. My grandfather was a socialist when that word still could be used. He even ran for state senate, though not surprisingly lost. He was hardly well off with a store that sold candy and papers, and why he needed that broken down truck my grandmother still complained on her deathbed was a mystery to her. The first time I was almost killed in a car, an axle sheared, our back wheel bounced past us. We spun out of control over a busy highway and pulled up a yard from a tree, much like the tree in the photo of the death of Camus, with his publisher's sports car gruesomely wrapped around it. Such a short time between my automobile madness and my rapture reading Camus, Sisyphus telling me why suicide wasn't the route, though at the time it could seem so. What did he say exactly? I don't think there was much about love, which would be my reason now. Love, family, poetry, art. I sometimes imagine my Chevy was devoted to me like a dog. That was before death arrived, mine and everyone else's. Anne Sexton's father died in a car. Dear Anne made certain too. Pollock, Zeeble, Nathaniel West, Tom Mix, for God's sakes, me nearly 4 times, and my grandfather, Charles Kasdan, whom I just realized now I miss, and whom, if I'd been there, I know I could have saved. Pump the brakes gently, I tell him, and we glide up to the rails and wait in the beautiful snow. He'd offer some wisdom to hand on to my grandsons, the train clattering by us, the mingling steam of our breath. The day continues lovely. Some explanations. The first line is, with fear and trembling, I studied my Kierkegaard, with sickness unto death. Kierkegaard was a famous Danish philosopher, theologian, and those are the titles of his 2 most accessible books, really, Fear and Trembling and Sickness unto Death. Then I speak about Kierkegaard for a while. Then I speak about Buber, who was Martin Buber, the great Jewish scholar and tale reteller and real philosopher also, who told a lot of, retold a lot of old Jewish religious stories, Hasidic stories. Then I think that's all you have to know. I speak of our dog Wendy, who you already know. You met her. The day continues lovely. With fear and trembling, I studied my Kierkegaard. With sickness unto death, I contemplated with him my spiritual shortcomings. And it didn't occur to me until now that in the Kierkegaard I've read, he never takes time to actually pray. Odd. This isn't to question his faith, who dare, but his, well, agenda. All those intricate paradoxes of belief he devotes his time to untying, retying. Can it be that Kierkegaard simply forgets to pray? He's so busy untying, retying. I understand that. I have times I forget to remember I can't pray. Can't pray. This June morning, just after sparkling daybreak, and here I'm not praying. My 3 grandsons asleep on their mats on the floor of my study, shining, all 3 more golden than gold, and I'm still not praying. Why aren't I? Even our dog Windy sprawled beside Turner, the youngest, Turner's sleep-curled fist on her back. Why haven't I prayed about them? I can imagine someday something inside me saying, well, why don't you? Something inside me, as though suddenly would be something inside me. There's a Buber story I'm probably misrepresenting that touches on this. A rabbi spends endless hours deciding whether to do good deeds or pray. He thinks this first, then that. This might be good, maybe that would be better. And suddenly a voice that can only be God's erupts. Stop dawdling. God, he thinks. He's been chastised by God. Stop dawdling. And what happens then? In my anti-boobering of the tale, everything's lost. The fool's had his moment with God. Even Moses had only how many? And he squandered it because all he could do was stand stunned, mouth hung metaphorically open, losing his chance to ask for guidance. But he vacillated again. And what happens now, he wonders in anguish. Maybe I should get out of this business, find a teaching job, write a book on my desolation, my suffering. Then he hears again louder, stop. Stop. But this time it's his own voice, hopelessly loud, and he knows he'll forever be in this waiting, this without God, his glimpse of the undeniable already waning. And what about me? Leave aside Kierkegaard, Buber, the rabbis, just me. Haven't I spent my life trying to make up my mind about something? God, not God, soul, not soul. I'm like the binary kid, on, off, on. But isn't that what we all are? Overgrown electrical circuits, good, bad, hate, love. We go crazy trying to gap the space between on and off, but there is none. Click, click, left, right. Humans kill one another because there's no room to maneuver inside those minuscule switches. Meanwhile, cosmos roars with so many voices we can't hear ourselves think. Galaxy on, galaxy off, universe on, but another just behind this one more out front waiting for us to be done. They're flowing across us, sweet swamps of being, and we thrash in them, waving our futile antennae. Turner's awake now. He smiles, stands, Windy yawns and stands too. They come to see what I'm doing. Turner leans his head on my shoulder to peek. What am I doing? Thinking of Kierkegaard, thinking of beauty, thinking of prayer. Thank you. And answers.
There's one from Sam.
Samantha.
Are most of your poems written in retrospect, or are they sort of, or did you write any of them right after these events in your life?
I usually write them before the things happen.
Oh, I see, prophetic.
So how else would you characterize it if I'm not writing it? I'm always writing. Aren't we always writing in retrospect?
Well, but like Wordsworth wrote Tintern
Yeah,
Abbey
tranquility.
way after, you know.
Yeah. Well, I write way after. Some of my poems take 20 years or so to write. On the other hand, like the poem Back, that was actually written on the spot in my little notebook. That was about the closest I get to an event. 4 minutes. But usually it takes a long time.
Mm-hmm.
But not always. The last poem actually sort of grew as I was there in the room with my grandsons. And I didn't write it. It took, a year or so to write it, but it wasn't recollecting. I knew what the poem sort of would be when I was sitting there with them. Yeah.
Why do you write?
Because you can't play golf all the time. I'm joking, I don't play golf. I was introducing and taking question and answers for a friend of mine, a novelist, Chang Ray Lee, who's a great novelist, and also a great golfer. And he had been talking somehow about golfing in terms of writing, and then someone asked him that question, and I said, because you can't play golf all the time. Because you have to do something. I mean, that's what it comes down to. When I started writing, when I wrote my first poem, I thought this is the first thing I've ever really liked doing, except hanging out with girls. I was 19, which I consider very late. You're supposed to start in the cradle, so my whole life until I was about 65, I always felt illegitimate because I'd started too late. Next. Yeah, is that a hand?
Oh, yeah.
Do you have a favorite poem that you've written or a favorite collection?
Well, one's most recent collection tends to be the one that one is most favorite.
Yeah.
And in that collection, I think the last poem I read is probably my favorite. There are others I like too. There's some funny ones, and political ones, but I like that poem a lot.
Yeah.
It also grew nicely. Some poems you sort of struggle with, you hack at, and that one just sort of grew. So I don't have any resentment toward it the way I did with some of the harder ones. Yeah.
You said one poem took a year to write, whereas you said another one wrote 4 minutes after you experienced it. On average, so how long would you say you work on it?
Probably a year from the time I first think of it and take a note. On the other hand, some more quickly. And as I said, I had one poem that really took me 20 years. I would write it, go at it every year for a while. And then finally I realized that there were 2 poems in it, and I split them, and then I could write them. I don't have time to read them. Yeah, way back.
How many have you written in total?
What?
How many poems have you written?
I published about 600, and then I've written probably another 2,000 that I threw away. Yeah.
What are some of your personal favorite poems and why?
Of mine or of the world?
It could be any other author yourself.
Oh, there's many, many, many. One of the nice things about being a poet or an artist is that your education never ends. You're always learning and teaching yourself and finding new sources of way to do things and ways to get inspired. So over the years, there have been literally dozens of poets who were my masters, who I just went into apprenticeship with. I mentioned a lot in the poem, that poem Whack. Yeats was huge, Rilke, all of them, Lowell, Bishop. There's just many, many, many. As I say, that's one of the pleasures that you don't quite realize when you're young. When you're young, you're just impatient to write poems. But when you're looking back, you realize that, in fact, the studying to learn to write poems was as good as writing the poem, or almost. Yeah.
So obviously, throughout the reading, we've noticed that you have some fairly elusive poetry. Like you have a tendency towards putting a lot of either the words of authors or the thoughts of other poets in
As
your
I say,
poetry.
just in this last book.
Yeah. So, I think it's kind of a broad question, but like, what kind of purpose do you think that really serves in your poetry? Is it to just bring them back to mind for the people who are reading your book, or is it, is it beyond that? Is it like a really specific purpose in your poems?
No, they're an intimate part of my consciousness. And writing about a poem is really writing about your consciousness in one way or another. So leaving them out for the first 50 years of my writing career, 45 years or whatever, was a convention. It's a convention to say I'm not going to speak about what's actually in my mind because I'm making poems, and the background, the stuff that comes before the convention is it's not there. And I just decided to break that convention and actually talk about when I'm writing. I do think of other poets, and so instead of just thinking about them and maybe getting an idea, I threw them in. So the whole book is filled with dozens of them. So that's a good question. Yes, cameraman.
How did you get a publisher to look at your first work?
You send it to them. It was easier back then. There were more poetry publishers and many less poets. But I actually, it was, if you want a little anecdote, I had sent my book to actually just one publisher. And someone sent it for me, then it got lost. It took months and months. And then I met the poet Anne Sexton, who's in my poems. She gave a reading in Philadelphia where I lived, and I drove her to the airport, and I said, I'm a poet, and I have a manuscript. And she said, send it to me, and she really loved it. So she said, send it to my publisher, Houghton Mifflin, and tell them I sent it to a certain person. So I sent it, and somehow it didn't go to that person, it went to another person who really loved it, but wanted some authentication that it was good, so they sent it out to be read, and they sent it to Anne Sexton. And so she wrote this letter that was so good they used it as the dust jacket text of the book, and they took the book. There was a lot of luck involved. There's always a lot of luck involved. It's very unappreciated how much chance and things like that happen. You meet the right person, you happen to send your book to the right person, things like that. Yeah.
What's your best advice to young writers?
Read. Young writers tend not to realize that it's as important to, especially if you're a poet, the reading of poetry is as important as writing. And I tell my students in my workshops that it shouldn't be separate acts. You shouldn't read one day and write the next day. You should be reading and writing at the same time on your desk, so that the other poet can infuse you the way you get infused, the way tea gets infused. That's the most important advice. Yeah.
Is there a poem that people who are familiar with your body of work ask you to read? And if so, are you still satisfied with that one, or?
No. I'm satisfied with it. They don't ask me to read it, but I'm satisfied. I don't publish things in books unless I'm satisfied with it. I've had a lot of magazine publications, and then I've decided either the poem needed to be radically changed or that it shouldn't be in the book. But once it goes into the book, I'm satisfied.
What's the one poem?
There isn't one. Near the end.
Well, but probably are some people who have a question or two that are being a little bit shy. Shall we just say we have 2 questions left, so if you're being shy, now is the time to stop being shy? Anybody?
Nobody.
Oh, there's one.
So you said that it was really important for you to make your poems like generally accessible. Is that for financial reasons, or?
Poets tend not to think of financial reasons. You don't sell enough books for it to make a difference, which gives you great liberty. You can pretty much do whatever you want. But unfortunately, we never get the chance to. I had an argument with my editor a few weeks ago, who's also a poet and a great translator. And I have a book of prose, and I was thinking maybe we could publish this not in the poetry section of the publishing house, but somewhere else. Maybe my readership would increase. And he said, I wish you'd stop worrying about your readership. Now, I thought it's supposed to be the other way. You're supposed to worry about the readership, but he knows there's no way to do it. Unless something happens and you happen to become a public figure. Yeah.
This kind of pairs with that question. Why do you think that poems don't sell?
Because people are stupid.
People in general, or the people who
People
don't
who
buy
don't
poems?
buy poems and don't read poems. I was talking at dinner about the fact that not many, most people, if you put a poem in their hands, they panic. They say, I don't understand it, before they even look at the page. I can't understand poetry. Why are you giving me a poem? So that's not the happiest part of being a poet. I guess that's it.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.